you're traveling abroad. You walk into a pub in London, Buenos Aires, or Berlin, and say, "Hey, did you catch the soccer game last night?" The room goes quiet. You feel dozens of eyes on you. Someone raises an eyebrow and mutters, "It's called football, mate." Sound familiar? Why is this such a big deal? Why do Americans call the world's most popular sport soccer, while nearly every other country calls it football? Is it just American stubbornness? Or is there more to the story? Today, we're diving into the strange, surprising history behind this naming divide, and trust us, it's not as simple as you might think. Let's go deeper. The origins of the word football. Let's start in 19th century England, the birthplace of modern football. Back then, the word football didn't refer to one specific game. It was a general term for a whole family of ball games played on foot, as opposed to on horseback. That included rugby, what we now call soccer, and other regional variations played in schools and communities across the UK. In the mid-1800s, efforts began to standardize the rules, and two distinct versions started to emerge. One was the rugby-style game, which allowed players to carry the ball. The other was the association football game, where carrying the ball was not allowed. To tell them apart, people began shortening the names. Rugby football became known simply as rugger. Association football? That was shortened to, you guessed it, soccer. The term, soccer, comes from the word association, taking the SOC part and adding the common British slang suffix "sir." So ironically, soccer is a British invention. How soccer crossed the Atlantic. Now let's cross the pond to the United States. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, America had its own version of football evolving, a mix of rugby and local innovations that would eventually become American football. This game quickly grew in popularity, especially at universities like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So now, Americans had two sports. One called football, which was their own version. The other called soccer, the imported British version of association football. To avoid confusion, the name soccer stuck. And for most of the 20th century, that worked just fine. In the US, football meant touchdowns, helmets, and Super Bowl Sundays. Soccer was niche, more of a youth sport or immigrant pastime. But as soccer grew globally, the naming split started to draw more attention and criticism. The global popularity divide. Today, association football is the most played and watched sport on the planet. Over 250 million players. Over 3.5 billion fans. One sport. One name, football. Except in the US, Canada, Australia, and a handful of other places, where it's still called soccer. That's why American fans often feel the heat when they travel or engage with global audiences. To much of the world, soccer feels like cultural heresy. But again, here's the twist. Until the mid-20th century, soccer was still widely used in Britain too. British newspapers and commentators used the word regularly through the 1960s and even into the 70s. It wasn't until soccer started to feel too American, thanks to growing media imports and globalization, that the UK began to push back against the term. So in a strange way, the British gave Americans the word soccer, then later mocked them for using it. Make it make sense. Why the word soccer triggers people. So why does this naming issue cause such strong reactions? It's not just about language. It's about identity. For many countries, football isn't just a sport, it's part of the national fabric. It's religion in Brazil. It's working-class pride in England. It's political expression in countries across Africa and Europe. So when Americans use a different word, especially while historically not caring about the sport, it can feel like cultural arrogance. Like they're putting their own spin on a global tradition they didn't create. Plus, there's the long-running stereotype of American exceptionalism. If it's not ours, we'll rename it, repackage it, and make it our own. So even though soccer is technically a British term, its American usage feels symbolic of something bigger. It's not just about the word. It's about power, influence, and who gets to define global culture. Australia and Canada, similar stories. By the way, the US isn't alone here. Australia also calls it soccer to avoid confusion with Australian rules football, their own popular national sport. Canada uses soccer too, because Canadian football, similar to the American version, has a big following there as well. So in all these countries, the name soccer isn't some weird outlier, it's a practical solution to avoid mix-ups with other types of football. Is the name changing in the US? Here's what's interesting. As the global game gains popularity in America, the tide is slowly shifting. More fans, players, and media outlets are starting to embrace the term football, especially when referring to international teams, tournaments, or players. Major League Soccer, MLS, still uses the word soccer, but you'll often hear fans say things like, "Football culture is growing here. This city's becoming a football town. He's a proper footballer." So while soccer is still the dominant term in the US, the lines are beginning to blur, especially among die-hard fans. Final thoughts. So why do Americans call it soccer? The short answer? History. The long answer? A winding tale of language, empire, cultural identity, and the way the world evolves in messy, fascinating ways. The term soccer wasn't some American invention, it was British slang, born out of 19th century schoolbook culture. It spread around the world, and only later became a kind of linguistic hot potato, embraced by some, rejected by others, politicized by many. But this debate isn't really about just the word. It's about what the word represents. In the US, soccer represents a sport that long stood in the shadow of baseball, basketball, and American football. But over the last few decades, it's been rising fast, thanks to immigrant communities, growing youth programs, global media, and of course, the internet. It's no longer weird to see packed stadiums for MLS matches. It's no longer surprising when Americans stay up late to watch Premier League or World Cup games. And it's no longer accurate to say Americans don't care about the sport. Meanwhile, the rest of the world has its own stake in the word football. It's not just the default name, it's part of national identity in dozens of countries. Calling it anything else can feel like an affront to that passion, that history, that pride. So when people argue over soccer versus football, they're not really arguing over semantics. They're arguing over ownership, legitimacy, and cultural status. They're asking, who gets to define the default? Whose culture gets to be normal, and whose is the exception? And how do we navigate a world where traditions collide, blend, and sometimes clash? Language reflects power. And when it comes to naming the world's most popular sport, the conversation says a lot about how people see the US, and how the US sees itself. But here's the good news. Whether you call it soccer or football, whether you grew up with Messi or Montana, whether you're watching from Manchester or Miami, it's the same beautiful game. It's 90 minutes of tension, brilliance, heartbreak, and hope. It's chants and scarves, penalty kicks and red cards. It's the World Cup, the Champions League, the grassroots match down the street. It brings people together like almost nothing else can. And in a time when the world often feels more divided than ever, maybe that's what matters most. If you found this journey into sports, culture, and language eye-opening, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe for more weekly deep dives, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Tell us in the comments, do you say soccer or football? And does it shape how you see the sport, or the world? Stay curious. Stay respectful. And I'll see you in the next one.